Hello guys, Aaron here. So, I haven't made a video about a language before, but I had the idea to explain the Arabic alphabet or the Arabic abjad. So, in this whole COVID-19 pandemic, I have been learning languages. I currently also learn Bahasa Indonesia with Duolingo since it is an interesting language and most of my subscribers are Indonesian and speak Bahasa Indonesia. I would like to communicate with them. Also, I am learning Chinese and Arabic with Duolingo. Definitely 10 out of 10 language learning program. Definitely recommend to use it. So, I will explain Arabic right now. First off, Arabic is very much different like English. In Arabic, you write from right to left, not like in English. Almost every character has an isolated initial, medial, and final form, so you connect the letters together. Pretty cool, right? Arabic is an abjad, which means there are almost no symbols representing vowel sounds, except for some voweling signs on top of the symbols. And Arabic is the language of the Quran, the holy book of the Islamic faith, originating in Saudi Arabia. Arabic is spoken in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Mauritania, Libya, Chad, Sudan, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Somalia. But countries like Indonesia and Malaysia use it as a second language. And there are also 28 letters in the Arabic abjad. So let's go through them. First is Alif, which is simply a vertical line and it makes the A sound. This is one of the few letters in which the isolated and initial form is the same and the medial final forms are the same. So here is how to write the forms. Next is Ba. This letter makes a B sound and it's a curve with a dot on the bottom. This letter has all the types of forms. So here's how to write them. Next is Ta. This letter makes a T sound and it is like the Ba, but there are two dots on top. So here's how to write them in all the forms. And next is Ta. It is basically pronounced as a stronger D and it's like the Ta, but it has three dots on top instead. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Now next is Yim. It makes the J sound, and note that in Egypt, this letter makes a G sound. It's basically a squiggly line followed by a C and a dot in the center. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is Ha, which makes a hard H sound, and it's like the Jim, but it has no dot. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is Ha, which makes a stronger H sound, and it's like the Jim, but the dot is on top instead. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is Dal, which makes a D sound and it is a diagonal line and a horizontal line. This letter is like the Alif, that the isolated and initial form is the same and the medial and final forms are the same. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is Dal, which makes a hard D sound and isolated and initial form is the same, and the medial and final forms are the same. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is Ra, which makes the R sound and the isolated and initial form is the same, and the medial and final forms are the same. So here is how to write them in all the forms. Next is Sign, which makes the C sound and isolated and initial form is the same, and the middle and final forms are the same. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is seen, which makes the S sound and it's a W followed by a big curve. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is sheen, which makes a SH sound like in shout out. And it's the scene, but it has 3 dots on top. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is sod. It's like pronounced like a stressed S. It is a circle and a curve. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is dot, which makes a D sound, but it is different than the dal. To pronounce dot correctly, you must press your tongue against your upper gum area, right where the gum meets your upper teeth, and then make a D sound. And it has a dot on top instead. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is da, which is like the dot in which you press your tongue in your upper gum and make a T sound. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is da, which makes the C sound and it's like the ta. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is ein, which makes a glottal stop and can replace the E sound in English, and it's like a reverse tree. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is the hardest letter to pronounce in Arabic. It is hain, which is pronounced like the ha, but it is weaker. And the only difference to ein is that it has a dot on top. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is fa, which makes an F sound and it's like the ba, but without a dot on top, and it has a loop on the right side. And also a dot on top. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is qaf, which sounds like a Q, and it is like the fa, but with 2 dots on top of the loop. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is kaf, which is pronounced like the K, and it is a vertical line, a line heading left, and a 2 in the middle. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is lam, which makes an L sound, and it is a line and a curve. And also, if you put an alif after a lam, it is not like this, but like this. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is meme, which makes the M sound, and it is a loop and a line heading down. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is noon, which is like the ba, but with a dot on top, and it sounds like the N. So here is how to write them in all the forms. Next is ha, which makes the H sound, and it is basically a circle. So here's how to write them in all the forms. Next is wo, which makes a W sound, and it looks like the 9, and it can be substituted for the U sound. So here's how to write them in all the forms. And finally, there is yo, which makes the Y sound, and looks like a snake with 2 dots on the bottom. This letter can also be substituted with the O sound. So here's how to write them in all the forms. So that was all the letters. You know that there are two more letters, Alif Maksura and Ta Marbuta. The letter Alif Maksura is rarely used, identical to the Yo, and the Ta Marbuta, which can be used at the end of a word to mark the female form. However, Ta can only exist in the isolated and final forms. There's also diacritics, which are signs on top of or at the bottom of the letters, which adds a vowel sound. They are Fatha, which is a line on top of a letter which adds an A sound. The Kasra, which is a line on the bottom of a letter which adds an I sound. The Dhamma, which is a knot added to the top of a letter which adds an U sound. The Sukun, which is a circle on top of a letter which doesn't add a vowel. And the Shadda, which is a W added on top of a letter making a double sound. Now hopefully you can read Arabic. Like for example, what does this say? It says marhaban, which means hello in Arabic. So before ending, I want to mention that I actually know a native speaker of Arabic. His name is Nurbitian and he currently speaks Arabic and English and lives in Algeria. So if you see this Nurbitian, tell me some facts of Arabic in the comments. And if you don't read Arabic well, keep practicing the letters and their connecting forms and the diacritics. If you want to learn Arabic words, then take the Arabic course in Duolingo. You just have to download the app, select Arabic, and click Learning Arabic for the first time. So that's the end of the video. Wadayan!